All right, we're going to get rolling with our final session of the day. Is everyone's brain full from today? I think it should be. I think we've had a lot of brain-filling content. So our next speaker, I would say you know him, you love him, but maybe you know him. I don't know. Does everyone know our next speaker? Because Joel was super active in the Mac community for a very long time and then went to work for Apple, which means you fall off the map. So there was this big gap of time where I think other Mac admins did not get to know his work, but now he has left the nest and is back among us, which is fantastic for all of us because we get his brain power and sharing and ability to come speak at conferences again and things like that. So. Yeah. Can't.
No, that's not what I wanted to do.
Good God.
Oh, I hit the wrong button. I went over one. Right there. Hey.
Oh my goodness. All right.
Thank you.
So, all right.
Am I on?
For you have to probably
check.
unmute.
Put something in my pocket. There we go.
There you go.
All right.
So for the first time at MacTech, Joel Rennich.
Woo! The session title was very, I should probably leave this on or else I have to take off the whole headset. Oh, hold on. All right. The session title was very exciting. The future of directory services. And you can't say that without a booming voice, right? So here we are, NOMAD and the future. Wow, rough crowd at 4 o'clock. I'm Joel, Chief Instigator, Orchard and Grove. That's our new company. Josh is here, our Chief Development Officer. You may remember us from such websites as AFP 548 from many years ago. Woo! As Ed kind of mentioned, the gentleman with the light up sign is clapping very vigorously. That's very good. Thank you. So we're here to talk a little bit about NOMAD. Who's using NOMAD? Oh, only about a third of the room. We need more there. Who knows about NOMAD? Who wandered into the wrong session? Good. No hands on the last one. That's exciting. So we'll talk about kind of what we've done in the last couple of months. And then we've got some cool new stuff that we've never shown working successfully before. We've shown, but never shown working successfully. So Josh is going to demo that. And then I've got exactly. And then I've got magnets and bottle openers, because I always like to bring stuff. In the beginning, this is the future of directory service. So in the beginning, there was Active Directory, right? Not that exciting. I apologize. I was there at WWDC in 2005, and I stood up on stage, and I said, everyone should bind their Macs to AD. It's really great. All your problems will be solved. And you would have Active Directory, and you had all these Macs around it, and you would have people living in harmony, and birds would sing, and unicorns would dance, and you would double your Mac population because all the Windows people would love it, right? Well, sometimes that happened, and then sometimes other things happened, and then sometimes Apple happened, and everything you thought was working maybe wasn't after a bit. And then a new OS release would come out, and then everything would have to start over again. So, ideally, we're going to provide you with a much better way of doing this. But before we can kind of talk about what we have now and ways that you can solve this, really quick, what do we need out of Active Directory? As a Mac user, there's only a few things that we really care about in Active Directory, right? And the components that make up Active Directory are pretty simple, have been around for a very, very long time. So you have LDAP, right, Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. You have Kerberos for authentication, LDAP for user information. And then Active Directory is just this big whole mess of data that covers everything else. Not incredibly exciting for most Mac users, because the tiny little piece that they need is just maybe where their home directory is and a few things like that. So why are we looking at everything within AD when all we care about is a little bit? The biggest thing that people want to get out of Active Directory is single sign-on. We want to be able to sign in once with one password, and then magically everything else appears websites, SharePoint, file shares, whatever else, and we just get to the things that we need without having to constantly re-enter our password. So that's what really most people care about Active Directory. How do we get that? Well, these are the things you can get when you get single sign-on. Certificate provisioning, Exchange, although no one really uses it for that. DFS, which gets weird for a variety of reasons, and then printers. So we want to find out a good way that we can get all of these services without necessarily having to have that very hard-wired bind between the Mac and Active Directory. And where a lot of this goes wrong is at the login window process, right? How many people have AD? Probably most people in the room, right? How many people have sat at a login window and watched the beach ball for a little while, all right? A very common occurrence, keeps the help desk tickets going up. That's not a good thing. Keeps the users angry. That's not really a good thing at all either. So how do we get rid of that? Because this is where a lot of the, whatever the opposite of magic happens, it happens here. If DNS doesn't work, if the network isn't there, if you have a lot of other problems, the login window just stalls when you're bound to Active Directory. Not good. So when we looked at this, we said, well, the AD plugin is great. It's good code. It's been around for a while. And it's not really its fault. All right? It's a persistent connection. It's not something where it's just a RESTful interface that it can throw a bit of JSON back and forth. You actually have to have an open socket. You have to communicate over that. That's a lot of complexity at login window. You don't know what the network is. A lot of people are much more mobile. You have laptops opening and closing. They start on one network. When they wake up again, they're on a completely another network. How do we manage all these things and still have a good login experience? So the login window doesn't really facilitate that very well. You do have the annoyance where, although in High Sierra it's a lot better, the login window wasn't really good at telling the user when their password would expire. And so you'd have a lot of Mac users that were kind of caught short with an expired password and they don't even know it. The Mac user will only get notified about a password change at the login window, not at the screensaver. And more, most users don't ever log in at the login window anymore, right? Instead, they're just going in and out of the screensaver. They never worry about the other parts. So all of this means that you could have potentially a lot of unnecessary help desk calls. We want to get rid of help desk calls. We want to make things simpler for you. So that's why we started thinking there's got to be a better way. Plus, you have the concept that at the login window, maybe many years ago, it was really interesting to have a laptop where anyone in your organization could walk up to and sign into it. It was kind of fun. Maybe if you had a lab, that'd be interesting. There's still reasons for that today, but more and more, everybody is on a one-to-one environment with a laptop. And in that particular use case, there's no reason for the entirety of your domain to ever be looked up. You're not using NFS servers, so you really don't care about what everybody's UIDs are. You're not having multiple users log into that system. So now we have this complete infrastructure for identifying 100,000 people in your domain, but you're never going to identify more than one on that laptop. All right? So that seems like a lot of overkill for a situation that just isn't there anymore. It used to be that you could kind of shoehorn policy, and I was a promoter of this, the scheme extensions. I apologize. It was a great idea at the time. I'll buy you a beer if you still have them in your domain. So at the time, it was great because you could do the scheme extensions. You could put MCX, if you remember that. You could put that into the directory, and then that policy would apply to the Mac. Anymore now, with Apple, we've kind of divorced ourselves, and the policy doesn't come from the directory service anymore. Policy comes from an MDM server, all right? So why are we having all this connection to something when we're not even using it for policy, we're not really using it for authentication, and we're never going to look up any user other than the one that's right in front of me right now, all right? So a lot of overhead, we don't really need it. Group resolution, when have you ever needed to look up one of the 3,000 groups in Active Directory on your Mac for something that the Mac was doing, right? Maybe you can use it for management, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But as far as actually using it for file permissions locally, there's really no need for that. So we've introduced the concept of what we call casual binding. And it's this idea that you've got this kind of binding continuum. On the far side over here, you can be bound to AD and you can have a mobile account. All right? What you're probably doing today if you're using AD, so you start off, you use the AD plugin, you then sign into the system as a mobile account, you then end up with a local user, kind of-ish, until it breaks. And that local user is there until it breaks, and they're able to do things. This is about where a third of the accounts that we're working with NOMAD are currently at. We also have this group in the middle that they're bound to AD, but they're using local accounts, not mobile accounts. In some cases, this is a bit of a transitionary period. You may have security policy or security teams that say you shall bind. They don't know why, they don't really know what that means, but they have this belief that if your Mac is bound to AD, somehow it's more secure. It's not. But they can look in the Active Directory users' computers and they can say, look at all these Macs. So sometimes that gives them a little bit of hope there. So in that case, we have users that are using the AD plugin to bind to AD, but then all the users are local to that account. All right? So they never have a mobile account, they're never authenticating off the network, and this immediately cleans up with a lot of the login window problems. All right? You still have some of the benefits of going out to AD and doing this. You can be bound, you can get machine certificates for Wi-Fi, which is the most common use case there, but you don't actually have to have a network or a mobile account for those users. And then finally, we have the third side all the way on the this is freedom, right? The machine is unbound, and you're just using a local account. This is the end state for where we want people with NOMAD. Having said that, and we have a lot of fun, the name NOMAD stands for No More AD, right? We get that Active Directory is very useful. We get that Active Directory will be here for quite some time. We have no intention of trying to remove Active Directory from the back end of your environment, your infrastructure. We are very interested, though, in not having Active Directory being kind of crammed into the local Mac and making sure all those pieces work. All right, so be very clear about that. And we also are very understanding that there's environments, especially if you're an educational system and you've got lab machines, there's environments where binding really does make sense still. In particular, for lab systems that are wired, you may not have ever had any problems, all right? Especially when they're a little bit controlled, they're not moving around, the network's not changing. Keep those bound to AD, keep them on a wired network, and you're going to be fine. And NOMAD can hopefully help you out there as well. So what we mean by casual binding is going all the way to that kind of right side of the slide, where you have a local account. When you sign into the Mac using a tool like NOMAD, you will get Kerberos tickets for that user. So we will sign into AD. Ideally, we'll do it automatically for the user because we keep their password in the keychain. We'll get a set of Kerberos tickets for that user. All of the single sign-on, all of those resources, everything else will be available to the user, and it'll be like they never had to enter a password. All right? That's the goal that we're going for. There's no persistent directory connection. We don't need one. We already know what the local user ID is. All right? We already have a Kerberos ticket for them. So if they go in and off the network, it's not a big deal. But we do have an awareness of being on and off the LAN, so that when a user can't see the domain, there's some things that they can't do. For example, they can't sign in if we can't see the domain. We don't want to tease them with this idea that it's always there. We want to make sure that they're opening up the VPN and things like that. All right? So that's casual binding. We'll do some demonstrations of that in a little bit. So that brings us to NOMAD. NOMAD's the app. That's Kerry the caribou. Kerry was not injured. This isn't a shield or like a wall mount. It's just, my wife was very concerned that we were advocating that we were killing our mascot. We're not. All right, so Kerry's very much alive. We have some pictures of her later. So NOMAD, ideally everything you like about AD without the bind. We'll give you single sign-on. We'll give you password expiration. We'll give the user the ability to change their password. We can pull certificates from a Windows CA. It's fully manageable via profiles and MDM. You can pretty much customize any piece of text that's in the entire UI. So if you don't like what one of the menu names is called, you can set a preference key to change it. If you don't want to see the menu at all, you can set a preference key to change that. We wanted it to be very, very flexible for you, the admin, so it can be functional for you and actually save you time instead of creating problems. We get this question a lot: is NOMAD useful in a bound environment? Do I have to bind to use AD? Do I have to unbind to use AD? So that comes up a lot. So we created a handy chart. If you're bound to AD, you can use NOMAD. If you're not bound to AD, you can use NOMAD. All right? Pretty much the functionality is almost the same between the two. And there's use cases in both ways. We're happy to go into depth about that. But both ways can save you time and help desk tickets by having Nomad on the machine. Nomad's a little more functional in the fully unbound environment, but we're happy to play in a bound environment as well. All right. What Nomad does when it starts up, we got a little process. This is some very basic kind of LDAP and Active Directory interaction. We look for SRV records. If we find the SRV records, we know we're on the domain. Once we find that, we look and see if we have Kerberos tickets. If we have Kerberos tickets, we actually go out and look up the user. We pull the entire user record from AD. We compute their password expiration. We find out where their home folder is. We see when their certs expire. Lots of good stuff out of that. And then we actually look up groups for the user. We write out most of these attributes in the local preference file. So that way, if you're using an MDM solution, you can suck some of those stuff up and use extension attributes in Jamf, for example, to put that into your MDM, and then do smart groups or something else off of that. We'll also leave it in the local preference file. So if you have scripts, things like you only want to run for users in this AD group, you can read this preference file, you can find what groups the current user is in, and then you can decide to run or not run. So we have a lot of admins using that to kind of hinge basic administrative functionality there. Here's a quick little graphic of the basic operation. Again, it's the DNS lookup. We then do a KINIT. We then do an LDAP search. We've got a couple of K-base articles on the website for how to do troubleshooting with this, and a lot of those kind of walk you through doing these basic functions. The dig command can look up SRV records so you can find out where you are. KINIT, we use the APIs, but it's effectively the same thing. And then LDAP search for actually pulling the LDAP user record out of that. So that's how we talk to AD and do everything that we need to do. Every time Nomad launches, it checks everything. So it checks if you've got Kerberos tickets, it checks your user record, it kind of just gathers itself together, right? On every time a network changes, Nomad knows the network changes, and so we'll do everything again. So we'll relook everything up. These are some interesting things in case the Active Directory user record changes. You've changed your password somewhere else. Now we know about it. We want to alert you so you can resynchronize your keychain and everything else. And then we run in the background every 15 minutes so that we've got it was a good balance between being too chatty and being aware of what was going on. So every 15 minutes we update things. And then finally, whenever the user clicks the menu, we do a background update. Because most users, if they think it's not working, they spam click the menu, right? And on the second or third time, it'll actually have completed, and they'll be like, oh, it's working. I don't need to call help desk now. So little tricks we put in there. Preferences file. It's XML. It's the standard OS defaults, so you can use the defaults command to work with it. If you edit it with a text editor, make sure you do kill all cfprefs-d, or else it's not going to do anything. And it's fully available through preference files, mobile config files. And I'll show you that when we get to the demo. We support the keychain, so we'll keep the AD password in the keychain. And then from then on, whenever the domain is available, if you don't have tickets, we'll get you new tickets. Ideally, what happens here is a user signs in once to Nomad, and then they may never have to think about their AD password for the next 90 days, right? Because whenever Nomad can see the domain, it'll get Kerberos tickets for them. It'll keep them updated, renewed, all the rest. So it can be a pretty cool environment and makes it very simple for the users to go through that process. Starting with version 1.1, we're now in version 1.1.2. We'll actually synchronize keychain items. So you can tell Nomad, like an exchange keychain item and some other things. And when the user changes their password in AD, through Nomad, we will also update items in their keychain. So ideally, just an easier way to keep things flowing a little bit smoother and not having to worry about that. We have a get software option. That is Monkey. Yay, Monkey. Greg's still there. See, I'm talking more about Monkey than Greg did. So this is the Managed Software Center. That's the Jamf self-service, and that's LandRev Heat. What is it now? Whatever. Avanti. It's changed the kind of names. So these are 3 self-service items that we understand. So by default, when you launch Nomad, if you have one of these on your system, we'll see a Get Software menu that will just open up that application. We kind of wanted the Nomad menu to be a kind of a one-stop shop for being able to get to anything a user would need to get to. And so these are one of them. However, since we're completely configurable, you're more than welcome to change this to any application that you want. You're also more than welcome to change the name of the menu item. So if you want to say request software, because that's different, and you want it to go to a ServiceNow page, you're more than welcome to do that. We can just call a URL that way. We also have a get help menu option. This is kind of designed for filing a ticket or opening up a screen share. So if you want to launch TeamViewer, we've got a BombGar integration, so you can launch BombGar without having to do a whole bunch of downloading and double-clicking and things like that. Or again, it can open up a URL, a local script, a command file, things like that. So it can be pretty handy for just an easy way for the user to get help. And here is in a couple of places within the app, we will do variable substitution. So if you want to call a URL to maybe generate a help desk ticket for the user, we can actually pass in their current AD username and some other functionality into that URL. So ideally that pre-populates some things, and then the user doesn't have to fill out a lot of the silly information themselves. 1.1 came out just about a month ago. We're now up to 1.1.2. But a couple of things. Version 1.1, we were previously supportive of High Sierra, but now we're even more supportive of High Sierra. We even had a High C fix. Who got bit by 10.13.0? You change your password in the system preferences for a mobile user, and it doesn't really change it. So we fixed that. So we have a workaround for that. It should be fixed in 10.13.1, right? Nobody's complaining, so I think it got solved. Latest version of NOMAD is all done in Xcode 9. We're about to convert it to Swift 4 in a little bit. It's currently on Swift 3. The entire project is open source, so you're more than welcome to take a look at it and explore. It's about 15,000 lines now, which kind of gives you an idea of how amazingly fun it is to work with Active Directory, to have that much code just to do LDAP and Kerberos lookups. And it is about 90% in Swift with a smattering of Objective-C that we have in there for some of the older APIs that there's not a Swift entry point for. Also new in 1.1, we will do share mounting file shares. SMB, AFP, it's supposed to do WebDAV, but I don't know anyone's used that, and it should also do NFS shares. But I don't know that anyone's used that either. But I know SMB and AFP get used pretty heavily. So you can give NOMAD a preference file of file shares. You can group them by AD groups, and we'll only mount that share if the user is in that group. We will also do things like it will be auto-mounted or not. It'll show up in a menu, or it'll just be there on the desktop. We can also do some fun things. We can mount it read-write or read-only. We can mount them hidden. We've got about 15, 20 different mount flags. Frogger found all those. Now he's paying attention again. So his name's in the code a couple of times, but that's one of the places. So a lot of good stuff, and we'll also do variable substitution. So if you want to have a really hairy SMB URL that's got a domain name in there and maybe a username and a UPN and some other stuff, we can support all of that because we'll do variable swaps on that SMB URL before we actually present it to the system. The keychain item sync, which I mentioned before, you've right now got to feed it a keychain item name and an account name, and then we'll go in and fix it. We've got variable substitution there. In the next couple of weeks, we'll have a new version, so you can do blank names, you can do some wildcards and some other stuff we're looking at. So we'll have some more cool things of manipulating keychains that way. We've got some 802.1x profile gluing. If you use NOMAD to get a wireless certificate from a Windows Web CA, we're able to match that to a 802.1x profile that you've previously installed. So with this, users will be able to use NOMAD. NOMAD can automatically get the certificate as soon as they sign in. So as soon as they sign into the domain, they'll get the certificate. We'll glue that certificate to the SSID that you've already set up through another profile, and they'll just automatically switch to the secure network. It's a really, really cool way of doing it. You still have to get the user on the LAN in the first place so we can sign into AD and get the certificate. But once you have that, we should automatically switch over to the secure wireless. We've also had a lot of improved support for just standard LDAP. We've got some open LDAP support and then also Open Directory. Anybody still in Open Directory? Hey, 4 or 5 hands, cool. So our goal is that you'll be able to use NOMAD with Open Directory and LDAP just like you would with Active Directory. Get Kerberos tickets, change passwords, things like that. As long as Kerberos is in use, which most Open LDAP environments have, and Open Directory definitely has, you'll be able to do all the same functionality. All right? We've got a welcome window, and we do recursive group lookups. So that was a big thing that a lot of people in the much larger domains were excited about. For the latest 2 versions, we've added some new languages. We've got better certificate handling. We do something cool that we've been doing for a while called UPC alerts, which is unannounced password changes. And how this works, if you're happily working away on your Mac, and maybe you've got a PC as well, or somebody in the help desk changes your password, we will notice that within 15 minutes, and we'll alert the user that their password has been changed on another system. Scientifically, we've tested and we found that a user's memory is only about 20 minutes. Once 20 minutes has gone by, they've forgotten their previous password. So we like to catch it within that kind of tender moment where they still remember it, and then they will resynchronize everything just by re-signing in on the Mac. So then we'll match up the keychain, file vault, the account password. Otherwise, if you've had this experience, you're on the Mac, everything's great, you're working along with password, you change it on the PC, the Mac doesn't get it, it doesn't know it, you close the Mac, you go home, you try to open it up, hilarity ensues. Nobody knows which password is in which system. All right? So ideally, we catch that very quickly. So we've got some good things there. So now, time for a little demo. Whoop. And all right, so here is my high C environment. I will not enroll in AirWatch. So this is just 10.13. We'll make this a little bigger so everyone can see. And I've got a version of NOMAD here. And I'll show you a couple of things. First of all, here's a config file. This is kind of a fun thing that we do. We've got a little utility that you can use to view it. But this is the easiest and best way to set preferences for NOMAD. And real quick here, you can just see that we're just setting 2 or 3 keys. We're setting nomad.test for the domain and some other things. And if you go to the NOMAD Slack channel, which is on the Mac admin Slack, we've got a tool called Property List Editor, which I can show you as well, that opens up these configuration files for NOMAD and for any app, and then allows you to sign them, and then you can upload them to your favorite MDM server, or you can just use them locally like I have here and do a little bit of a double click. So we're going to install this. I'm just going to take my password. So now that profile is in there. Well, that didn't like that. Come on. Now we've got a profiles menu item, and you can see that it's listed. So now we don't have to do any configuration of NOMAD. We can just run it. And just for this session, I'm going to show you some really cool stuff. You can actually run it from the command line. This is a handy thing that we do when we're doing troubleshooting. And all you've got to do is call the path to the actual binary that's bundled in that bundle. So, you know, wherever it might be, nomad.ops/contents/macOS, the old way of spelling it. So capital M, capital OS. And then nomad-V. This will put nomad in verbose mode and will give you all the logging straight to here and also run it in the UI. So it's just a handy way of seeing immediately what's going on. So this is fairly new. We've got this HTML view. You can customize it. It shows what version number you're on. If the user never wants to see it again, they can just click that. If you've changed the icons, because you can change the HTML view for this as well. All right, so we're now set up. It says I'm not connected because I haven't gotten my VPN up. You can see that there's a couple of menu items that are grayed out. If I go to Preferences, you can see that the AD domain and the Kerberos realm have been set, but the user can't mess with them because I've had that configuration profile installed. All right, so anytime something's managed, we let the user know they can't click on any of these things. So what I'm going to do, and you can see as I use it, there's stuff in the background that's going on. I'm going to connect to my VPN. There we go. It's going to see it. You can see it's doing a reachability check. This has now gone from not connected to being up there. I can now go over and sign in. You can see some of the stuff going on in the background. I just did a PDC lookup. to see what site I was supposed to be in. Now I've got 37 days left on my password up at the top. If I want to change my password, I can do that right from here. If you tell us what your password policy is, we'll put little red and green jelly beans here to let the user know if they've got enough complexity and everything else. In addition, here's that Get Help menu option. So this can launch a URL, app, a web page, whatever else. I've got a home SharePoint here. So if I click on that, it'll automatically mount the SharePoint. Of course, sometimes you get this from the Mac. Thank you, High Sierra. Actually, that came a little bit before then, didn't it? All right, so now I've got my home is right there. And you can see if I open up another terminal window and I do a K list, I've now got a Kerberos ticket and a couple of service tickets for the various things that are out there. So now I've gotten a very simple way of interacting with Active Directory. The user has this countdown up here at the top, so I know that I've got to change my password within 37 days. At 14 days, we start yelling at them once a day. At 7 days, we yell twice a day. At 4 days, we yell 4 times a day. At 2 days, we yell every other hour. At 1 day, we yell every hour. So if you get to the point where your password has expired, you have ignored like 147 notifications that your password is about to go. So at that point, you should just delete the entire machine and let them know that. A couple other things that you can do here. You can do a defaults read on our preference file. And there's a couple of things in here. Here's the groups that that user is a member of. Here's when the password's going to expire, December 23rd. If I hover over this, you're going to get a tooltip that says that same thing. So that's December 22nd in the local time zone. This is UTC. Here's the user that's last logged in. Every 15 minutes, NOMAD will run and let you know if that user has Kerberos tickets. So now you have a good understanding of whether the user is signed in or not. So if you have scripts that run in the background but depend on actually having a Kerberos ticket so you can download something and being on the domain, you can just look here and you'll be able to figure that out. We also have the home folder, the user email. We pull the user principal, the user short name, and the user UPN all from AD. And we keep track of when this user has changed a password. If multiple users have signed in, this will constantly build up with all those users. Right now I don't have this turned on, but you can actually do a local password sync flag to true. And every time we check the password in AD, we'll also check it locally. If they're not the same, we'll prompt the user and we'll force them to update their local password so that it matches their AD password. So with all of these things in place, you should be able to get to this casual binding nirvana that we like, where you will have a system where the user is a local user, not bound to AD. They will always be signed into AD when they can see the VPN or see the domain, and their local password will always be the same as their AD password. However, when they're off the network, you won't have to get the beach balls, you won't have to get all the lookups. The user won't be confused when their password changes in AD, but they didn't realize that, and they go to sign in and their password has changed. Because again, the password's local, so it's a little more interactive when these things happen. Questions on any of this? Did I do this wrong? I'm asking questions in the middle.
No, that's preferred.
That's preferred.
Absolutely.
Ed says it's preferred, so that's what we're doing.
It's a good method.
Regarding casual binding, how do you deal with users who forget their passwords without having to intervene via the
Large
help desk?
stick. So with casual binding, you could still have an IT admin account on the machine. If you're using an MDM solution, you'll have that. Hopefully you're file vaulted, and hopefully you're escrowing those PRKs. So if you do that, you still have a way into the system to reset their password. There is some user interaction that has to happen with the help desk or IT, definitely. What we have found, though, is by doing it this way, this is much more a consumer kind of model, all right? And in that, users know when their password's changing, because it only changes when they're actually signed into NOMAD and it tells them that's going on. So your password lockout should decrease dramatically just because people aren't as confused as to what happens and when it happens. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
So if you have less than 500 users, it's free to use for commercial
It's
use?
free for 1 million users. But we have support contracts and video that goes out. Did my machine go to sleep?
It did.
Oh, that was awkward. All right. So good that you mentioned that. I have a slide on that. Where'd my slides go? There's my slides. So the question was about, is the app free? The app is completely free. You can use it. Our largest account that I know of is 21,000 Macs using NOMAD. As far as I know, they have not bought support. That's not that I think they should. That's just that it's an open source product. So you're more than welcome to use it with as many machines as you want. It's under an MIT license. We have community support, which is primarily in the Slack channel. There are about 1,300 people in that Slack channel now. All right, so I used to answer a lot of questions. Now I don't as much. But there's a couple of really great people in that Slack channel that are helping out. But we do have support contracts. So if you want us to help you out, we've got, and there's nonprofit pricing and education pricing for all these that are about 20% off. So we're happy to help you out. We're happy to be your phone a friend. At the $2,500 a year level, we will actually brand it with all of your icons and imagery. So if you want to make your own Migrate Company Internet Connect password tool, we're happy to help you do that. Does that answer your question? Yes. Do you want to pay for it? No. All right, well, fair enough.
So you said it can get machine certificates from your Windows CA.
It can get user certificates.
Okay.
To get machine certificates, I mean, it can get machine certificates, but if I get machine certificates, you already have to have a machine object.
Right.
So that means you would have had to create it on your own.
That was my question.
And then it's just like, well, why bother? So we do have a tool to kind of help with that, but in general, it just gets the user certificates. Other questions?
Cool.
All the way in the back.
Does this work with Azure Active Directory, or is there a
Great
plan for it
question.
to work?
Not at this time. So Azure Active Directory, but you're almost like I planted you. So this does not work with Azure Active Directory. Azure Active Directory is Microsoft's new cloud-based identity provider, similar to Okta, similar to Google ID, and it's where we think the future of all of this is going. All right, LDAP and Kerberos is kind of old school, and it's not exciting anymore. So we have, I can't switch. There we go. So we've got another application that we've been working on, and it's in the secret projects folder. And this is NOMAD Pro. And NOMAD Pro is a SAML authentication enabler. I don't know, lots of big words, OAuth, yada yada, IDP, whatever else. Effectively what we're doing here, we've started with Okta, and so now we can do Okta authentications, synchronize the password locally. We've got plugins for Safari, we've got plugins for Chrome, we've got, who uses Firefox? Hey, we've got a plugin for you, all right? We wrote that. It was weird, but we wrote it. So in this case, I can actually do a sign in here, and this will actually sign me in, and then it'll open up my Okta dashboard and a web page. I have a plugin for it. You can see that. That's the icon didn't show up. VMware 10 has got a little weirdness, but I don't know. We'll do it better. So we've got a plugin here that when you actually try to go to an Okta page, if you haven't already signed in, you'll get my UI instead of the Okta UI. We'll then synchronize the password locally. So we've started with Okta. We're moving on to Azure AD, Google ID, and a few other things there as well, so that you can kind of get that environment. Again, we don't see LDAP and Kerberos to the desktop as a big thing in 2-3 years. Definitely the future is more of those cloud-based identity providers.
Nice. One more, if anyone has one more question. No? You're free to move on.
I'm free to move on. All right, moving on. But wait. There's more. So we're also been working on, and it's actually posted now, but I don't know that anybody's found it. So I won't tell you the name, but everybody knows where my code is, so you can find this. We have created a Swift Active Directory authentication framework. And you'll hear a little bit more about this from us. But effectively what this allows is you'll get a NOMAD session object which, with a site manager, which is aware of when your network changes. That caterpillar is the open LDAP icon. Nobody knows that. It doesn't look like LDAP. And an expiration manager. And all this is in one framework, which will allow you to add Active Directory authentication to any Xcode project that you have. And we've got a sample app out there that in about 20 or 30 lines of code, and this framework, you have Active Directory authentication, password changes, user information, password expiration, all of that stuff figured out. So we're very interested in other people using this. It was kind of a personal project because we needed to kind of pull all this together ourselves so we didn't have to keep rewriting the same code over and over again. So it's now in a framework and able to do that. So pretty exciting. NOMAD Pro, which we already talked about, everything you like about NOMAD but without AD. And like I said, right now we've started off with Okta, but we are moving on to all of the other identity providers as well. Because some really cool stuff there. We now have some fun things that kind of bridge Okta and Kerberos, for example. So when you sign it, who's using Okta? A couple people, right? So when you sign into Okta, we'll actually cache your username and password, and we'll get you Kerberos tickets as soon as you're on the Active Directory domain. So users can sign in at home to Okta, and when they show up on the VPN or when they show up in the office, we'll just get them Kerb tickets. So all those services that aren't SAMLized, is that a word? OAuth? Salamied? So all of those services will still work without any problems. You already saw the UI. We'll handle two-factor. We'll handle Duo. Papine. We'll handle Duo. All right, well, there we go. A couple of cool preferences. But now, we want to chat about another cool thing. This is the thing that's never been demoed successfully in public. All right? We're very excited that the next step of what we're going to do, it's going to be a new product for us, is going to be replacing the login window. And you may ask, why would we want to do that? Well, we've got some really cool functionality that we'd like to play with. So Nomad Login, we're calling it NOLO. In Sweden, I found that means embarrassing in Finnish. But it's not embarrassed, that's a different word. So we're actively in the realm of being embarrassed. Anybody done any work with the login window, messing around with the mechanisms? Anybody locked themselves out of the Mac? Yeah, all right. It's almost a 1-to-1 ratio there.
It's a lot of hands.
So we are going to run, and I'm stalling for time as they figure out, are you?
No, we've got slides.
All right, you're good? Yeah, I've got slides.
Yeah.
All right, cool. This was a very, intent view. All right? Okay.
Ponder.
All right. We're swapping. All right. This is ready for this. So the login window has a series of mechanisms. And as you go through those mechanisms, if any of the mechanisms fail, you don't log into the machine. Some of these mechanisms run as root. Some of these mechanisms run as the login window. And then some of these mechanisms will run as the user after the login happens. All right? What we want to provide you with login window is a very cool stack of things that you can do. And you can find this out. I made this really slow because it was really long. You can see that list of mechanisms from Security Authorization DB, read system.login.console. Again, really long and annoying, but you'll see all those mechanisms. So what we're going to provide in an open source framework, we'll have some other bits that are maybe buy-ups, but the basic stuff, we will allow you to do AD authentication at the login window without being bound to AD. What? All right, so you can have multiple domains. You can only authenticate certain users. You can only authenticate to certain domain controllers. All of those pieces will be configurable, and you'll be able to then get a Kerberos ticket on login. We also have a user creation. Josh is going to show this. Plug in,
Yep.
right? Because I think,
Yep.
Plug in. All right, so we got these 4 things. So an AD check. Right. So we'll check the user against Active Directory. If they don't exist in Active Directory, we won't let them sign in. All right? If they're already local, we can authenticate them locally, or you can mandate that they do both, authenticate to AD and authenticate locally before they can log in. All kinds of cool stuff there. If they authenticate to AD, but they don't exist locally, we will do a just-in-time user creation. The workflow here is you have a machine in DEP. In DEP, you put some security profiles, so for a good security posture, and you put our Loginwindow plugin to be deployed. You then suppress the Mac setup assistant so that the only thing you see as a user is you off to DEP, you then get to choose the time zone, and then you'll see a login window. At that login window, you authenticate to AD. If you exist in AD, we will create a user for you with that username, so they don't have a choice, and that password, so they don't have a choice. Now they're a local account with an AD username and password. You get into the system, NOMAD runs, keeps their password in sync. Ideally, the most common workflow we see for this is the idea of tattooing a machine. You get a brand new user, a brand new machine, they set it up, they sign in once, their user is now on that system, nobody else from your domain can sign in. All right? And you definitely know who that user is, their username matches AD, all kinds of good stuff. So Josh is here.
All right. So we're going to take a look at this here. So like Joel said, this is all done through the authorization plugin infrastructure. It's built in there, so it's all very nice. It's very secure. It runs as part of the system. We aren't shelling out passwords or usernames or anything like that. It's all kept inside those security contexts. And so we've got a Mac here, and assuming my network came up, we can take a look. And this is a Mac that, as you can see, has one user on it. We just have the local admin, and the guest user's turned off. And if I were to come and look over here, it's not bound to any kind of network service. Right? So we aren't bound to AD, we aren't bound to OD, anything like that.
This is where we pass the hoop
That's
over
right.
the no wires, all right?
No wires. Let's make sure we've got internet, which we do. Okay, so now we're going to log out. So there we go. Yes. And instead of the familiar old Apple window, we've got the NOMAD login window, right? And so what can we do? We can do all kinds of little things. You can, like, we could let you pick a domain here if you had multiple domains. But I'm going to enter in. If I just wanted to, I could enter in a local user, and it would just log in as that local user. And then skip our whole process, just forward on through. If I wanted to, though, I could enter in an Active Directory user. And then as long as the network is up. Try that one more time. Okay, thinking. And what we're doing here is we're authenticating against Active Directory using NOMAD, all of our frameworks that we've built. These are the same frameworks you're going to be able to get. And it is going to then go out, it's going to find the domain controllers, it's going to talk to them, it's going to go through and authenticate the user. We then build the user account locally on the machine, create a local user based off the AD user. Of course, now it's asking about Apple IDs. I don't want to right now. That's fine. So we create the local user account, we create the home folder, all that sort of stuff, and then you log in, and now we've got a desktop as that user. It is an AD-backed account with all the stuff that NOMAD brings with it, but it isn't bound to AD. We skipped the whole binding to AD part. Now, like Joel was saying, we could do certain things. You could tattoo this. We could make it so that after you do that one time, that we take our login window out of the equation, and it just goes back to the standard Apple one. Or we could leave it there so that other people could log in. If I were to look in system preferences now, you'll be able to see that now we actually have a standard user here. This is the user that we got from Active Directory. Still, we aren't bound to any network services. If I were to open up NOMAD on here, which I haven't put a profile on because it's just a fresh account, test, and KEYCHAIN, and close that dialog, done. Then we can sign in, and after we do this once, it'll do it every time. And then once we sign in, we'll see, like we saw with Joel's machine, we get our day count up there. I've got Kerberos tickets now. I can get all the same information. This works with and without the NOMAD on the desktop because we do everything separately. It's separate products that all look at the same information from the system. This isn't us trying to maintain our own version of Kerberos or anything like that. We're not that big of gluttons for punishment. So we're not going to try to do that. We just take advantage of the system. So all these different tools we have can look at these things and get right in. I could connect to a file server like Joel did earlier. I can type correctly. Does anybody know what causes that?
There's a pref key to stop
This
it.
was happening for anyone that doesn't know who I am. Joel and I ran AFP548.com a long time ago, and then the two of us both went to Apple for a long time. And when you go to work to Apple, it's kind of like when you file a bug and it goes into the black hole, right? So we were both there. This has been bugging me on and off in Cupertino on Apple campuses for about a year and a half. No one I've ever talked to in engineering can tell me why this appears. So if any of you have an idea, I would love it. Is the default to get rid of it? Great. Cool.
So some cool workflows that we're looking at with this. One, we're going to bring in Okta to this as well. That'll be a paid product, just heads up. You're already paying for Okta, so you can pay us a little bit as well. So you can create users out of Okta, and other identity providers will have Azure AD before long, Google ID as well. Since we own the file, since we own the login window, we can do some really cool things like if you've got a series of actions that maybe your IT staff does that just log into a machine, run a bunch of stuff, log out, destroy the account, you can actually just come up to the login window and go, do action 5.
Let's get bold here.
Uh-oh, you're going to do something cool?
I'm going to do something bold.
Uh-oh.
With the machine here.
See, already this demo has worked better than ever before.
I'm going to turn the Wi-Fi off on a machine using an AD account.
Okay.
Which is Wi-Fi through VPN through everything else. Now, if this was an AD-bound account machine, this would all be, just terrible, right? So I'm going to log back out. And I killed all the network connections. Yet. Because it's a local account now, it's just boom, we're back.
We think it's faster than the built-in login
Yeah,
window.
I don't know why, but I don't know why we are, but
I don't know if that was intentional, but we're definitely seem faster than the built-in login window. So we're looking at some very cool things that you might be able to do where you'd walk up to the machine, type in some sort of command instead of a username and password, and then the login window would just run those actions. So that would be something that you'd have set up. And that way you don't have to log in, run that, and then log out and clean up and do everything else behind yourself. We're also looking at, after the user has been set up, that we'll have a mechanism that can do things like pull an 802.1x certificate and set it up with a profile so that by the time the user hits here in the Finder, they're on that authenticated network.
So we're currently working hard on finishing the login window version. Like Joel said, the Active Directory version of this is going to be open source and available, like the rest of the open source NOMAD projects. And then like the NOMAD Pro projects, other authentications and stuff like that are probably going to be value add after that. But AD is going to hit a large swath of the use cases. And then we can start looking at other versions of this along the way.
Exciting?
Any questions regarding this? Oh, Ed says we're out of time.
We definitely have time for some questions, but I wasn't sure if Joel was going to say anything, but yeah, Josh Weisenbaker, everybody. Come on. I'm sorry you had to do your own introduction. I thought this was going to be like a little sly, like, surprise.
Surprise, I'm back.
Yeah, also recently released back into the wilds from Cupertino. So we're very delighted to have you back among us and contributing and
somehow Joel and I, it both worked out that we almost stayed exactly 11 years. So
I was 11 years and 2 days.
I was just about a month or two short of 11 years. So I got my glass brick, and now I can leave it on my shelf at home. So
nice.
that's
All right.
all that counts.
So we do have time for some questions, more NOMAD questions.
So you're replacing the login window mechanism that Apple provides with your
One of them.
One of them. There's a lot of them.
Yeah.
So we just removed the login one, the basic login window one, and replaced it with the NOMAD one. And it's a trivial thing to move back and forth. One of the exciting things that we're working towards also is because it's an authorization plugin more than it's really a login window plugin. That means you can use it for other console rights within the system as well.
Cool. So how are you keeping up, since all that's closed source on Apple's side, that they're not doing something in there that will affect the other mechanisms down the line?
Well, it's an open document. I mean, it's a documented API. It's one of the oldest, crustiest APIs in Mac OS. It is one of those ones that's marked as available starting in 10.0. So it is just a regular API. It's part of the public SDKs. So
Cool.
We're kind of where we're going. Everything we do in Nomad, we try to only use just public SDKs, not shelling out, not running command line tools that can change. We just go with open directory authentication, and we go with all those sorts of things. to
I
try to
think
stay.
there's a conversation to be had here later.
Yeah, we can definitely, if there's more, we can talk.
All right.
The VPN we're required to use is the Cisco AnyConnect VPN.
Sure.
You're compatible? You can make it work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Genius.
All you have to do with Nomad is, as long as it's a network connection that you can see the domain controllers or whatnot with, see your infrastructure with, then it should work.
We are very interested if anyone's done a per app VPN on the Mac. Anyone? Yes? No? You have?
One, yeah.
Because we're really excited. What we're finding is that there's a lot of users that only connect on the VPN every 90 days to change their password to comply with the security policies. And we believe we should be able to have Nomad work with a per app VPN. So Nomad would initiate a VPN on its own. The user wouldn't even have to worry about it. We'd have access to domain controllers, and they'd never mind. And so we're interested. If anybody's looking into that, catch me or Josh on Slack, and we'd love to chat with you about it. Because from reading the docs, we shouldn't have to do anything.
Yep.
And that's exactly what we like.
I have a question about Nomad Pro. Is there any plans to support ping identity?
There is. And if you're a large ping identity account, we'd love to talk to you so that you can smack around ping a little bit. So yeah, ping is on the list. One login, who's a one login user? Good. They're further down. So ping's on there. Google ID and then Azure are the big ones.
Yeah, those are the big four. Three we want to add after.
Yep.
Talk and stuff. I think there was a question over here.
Is there a question over here?
The bearded gentleman.
How are you doing the generation of the home folder? In other words, can you customize the template?
So yes, we're just using the regular template. So that should be fully customizable. Right now, it's a little bit of just a hack using Create Homedir to do that, but we're going to move away from that because we want to make sure we're building everything out. But our aim is to build it as closely as we can to the way Apple builds it as well, which once we did a bunch of looking through debuggers and assembly code and everything else, it turns out they just have a special binary that they shell out too that makes the home directory as well. So that made me feel not as bad about not doing it all with NS File Manager. But so yeah, we're going to just use the standard home directory stuff. So if you've got localized ones, if users log in with a different language, we're going to be detecting that so they get the correct language, localization, and things like that as well. Now that we've got the basics going, that's polished work for right now. Back over
Who
this way.
else? Back over here. Hang on one sec.
Is there a way for that profile to then redirect back to the server so that documents goes to their appropriate place on the server instead of?
Network home folders.
Yeah, Apple kind of took out the network home folders, didn't they?
And the synchronizing.
No, not at this time.
Yeah, I mean, the way that's worked is, we've got the home folder menu item that can pop it right up. For anyone that remembers portable home directories and
Your home on your iPod?
your home on your, well, that never shipped. Portable home directories and PhD syncing and all that sort of stuff. That was all real hit and miss a lot of times. So Apple kind of just got rid of it. Right?
It was terrible.
So it was pretty terrible. And so we do have the home mounting options and things like that to let users have easy access to it. But as far as using, I don't even know if the sync engine is in High Sierra. I don't think
Apple ripped out a lot of that.
Yeah, I don't even think the synchronization
That's probably why you're asking.
there.
Yeah. No, at this time, we can take a line from our Apple days.
Yeah.
We don't talk about future products.
But we will take that under advisement.
But we will take it under advisement.
We do have an issue tracker in GitLab, so you could file a feature request.
Howdy, fellas.
Hello.
Whoa. I have a quick question. Any plans to, in the future for this login option, build in, sort of what's been becoming more popular, like device health checks?
Sure.
At a station, that kind of thing?
We'd love to, maybe from a 3-letter company. Starts with D, ends with O.
IBM, I got it.
IBM, yeah, definitely IBM. No, what we like here, what we plan on releasing will be the mechanism framework itself, so that if anybody is interested in adding new pieces, you don't have to recreate the wheel. You can just add a new mechanism into our authorization plugin that we already have. So it should be very simple. We're going to have a couple of factory methods that will make it very easy to set the hint, the context, get the password, things like that. Because I think there's a billion things that could be very, very interesting. Because you're in this really cool moment where you're simultaneously root, the user, and you know their password. So setting up File Vault like what Crypt does, that is doable here. Having multiple authentication mechanisms stacked. I mean, if you really want to annoy the users, you got to sign into AD, Okta, and 3 other things before you can get into the Mac. The other cool thing we're looking at is this concept of, with guest users right now, you can have a guest user, but you don't sign into it. So with this login window, you could sign in as a valid user in AD, but we'd create a brand new home folder for you every time. So it would be very similar to a guest account, but with authentication on the way in. So some cool stuff like that we're interested in.
Cool. More questions?
All right.
All right. Thank you very much. We got some stuff up here if you want it. Thanks for coming.